Welcome back to page 121. Today we're going to talk about a companion to our old friend the Dragon magazine, Dungeon Magazine, or Dungeon Adventures as it was initially known. We're going to take a little bit look at the publishing history of this book, this magazine, and why it was actually pretty handy to have around. If you were stuck for an adventure, they were in these pages. So, today we're going to take a look at Dungeon Magazine. Dungeon Magazine, initially known as Dungeon Adventures for the TSR role-playing games, started publication in 1986. It was a Gen Con announcement, a lot of Gen Con excitement about it, and I remember hearing at Gen Con when it was released that it was going to be a subscription-only situation. They weren't planning on initially distributing this to game stores or comic book stores. They were going to try it by subscription only. I don't think that lasted very long. I haven't been able to find the info online about it, but I distinctly remember having a conversation at the booth when this was launched. You're saying, wait a minute, that's not issue number 1. That's issue 11. Well, that's where my collection starts. I have not all of these, but most of these from issue 11 up. It went from 1986, and then Paizo took it over in 2002. It was bi-monthly for a very long time. Went monthly under Paizo, and Paizo, shortly after they took it over, introduced what I thought was a great idea in these, the Adventure Path run, but I'll get into that in a little bit. The initial idea behind Dungeon was you would be able to just open this up and there'd be 4 or 5 actual ready-to-go modules within the pages of the magazine. The idea is great. I think the idea, I never heard this, but I've always assumed it, I think the idea was born out of the fact that they had a bunch of unpublished dungeons that had been submitted by readers, some of which were good enough that they actually could see publication, but for limits of space in Dragon magazine. So someone had the idea, hey, let's give them their own magazine. They were going to try it as a direct subscription situation for a while to see if there was any popularity, and then eventually move on. So just going to show a couple of different issues that I have pulled for this. There's issue 29. Now, the good thing about this magazine was, if you were stuck for an adventure for short notice of whatever length, there was something in this magazine that would be able to help you. They ran short sidetrack adventures all the way up through large running, where you'd be running a game for maybe 2 or 3 nights, up all the way to the adventure paths that they published under Paizo for 3rd edition. That was the good thing about the magazine. The bad thing about the magazine was, because it was written by so many different authors, there's never a flavor. The dungeons varied in quality and varied in just ideas. Some were really clever, some were pretty pedestrian. Editing was always very good. I never had any problem with. I'm sure that there were a typo here and there. I never really had an issue with it. I enjoyed the magazine, but I really didn't enjoy it enough to buy it every single month. I would thumb through it, and if there was something of interest, I would buy it. And again, that was until they went to the adventure paths. The thing I did like was sometime around this issue, around 29 or so, and I don't know the exact issue, but sometime right around here, they started publishing world-specific adventures. So you'd come in and it would be a Forgotten Realms adventure for levels 4 through 6, or a Greyhawk adventure, levels 8 through 10, or even Dragonlance, Al-Qadim, even Alternity got one in the late 90s. So that was a little more to my flavor. At least I could look for world-specific things, and then they would set it within the world where they would say, okay, this is taking place within the Bandit Kingdoms of Greyhawk, or this is down in the county of Sundi. And you would have a better feel, and there was better flavor, I felt, once it went world-specific. I bought this pretty faithfully from this point on, once they start going more world-specific, because it was also around the time, and a little bit before that, where dungeons were being written for Dungeon Magazine. You didn't just have a big stack sitting in some editor's drawer being pulled out and used. You had people actually writing a Greyhawk adventure, trying to get it published in Dungeon Magazine. A lot of future writers came from doing this. It was a neat idea. So in the 90s, I did buy Dungeon pretty faithfully. But again, the 90s were kind of a rough time gaming-wise. at least for our group. We had a lot of people marry and move away. We had some changing membership. At one point, it was down to 3 of us, but we kept it going. Things picked up in the 2000s for us. So because of that, my interest in D&D was down a little bit. I was playing a lot of BattleTech, Silent Death, and Traveler. I always played a lot of Traveler, but I was playing a lot of the other tabletop games. So my attention and my dollar's attention shifted a little bit away from Dungeon. I still bought Dragon on a pretty regular basis, but Dungeon I really didn't talk much. But like most things, you were able to get a lot of these as back issues for a relative song. So I think under Paizo, when they took over publication in '02, I felt that the magazine itself picked up quite a bit. It had a stronger direction even before the adventure paths. But once the adventure path modules landed, it just landed. It was beautiful. You had an actual cohesive idea that would run for usually about 12 issues, a full year, where you would be following this adventure path. Now, admittedly, it was for 3rd edition. I don't play 3rd, but it was also all Greyhawk information. So I have adapted a ton of this information and, in fact, Age of Worms to my Greyhawk 1st edition campaign. Because, as I've said before, I don't care where the idea comes from. I can adapt it to 1st and make good use of it. The adventure paths were the Shackled City, Age of Worms, and Savage Tide. Each took place across the Flanus, so you got a nice geographic view of it. And at the time, they would publish sister articles in Dragon magazine. So it was kind of a must-buy. You'd buy both Dragon and Dungeon that month because you wanted the full story. And that was pretty clever on their part, I felt. So here's an Age of Worms episode right there. So it was a very good magazine. I really felt it came into its own with adventure paths. Unfortunately, in '07, WotC called in the license. Paizo wasn't publishing it anymore. And Dungeon on issue 150 ceased to be published as a physical print magazine. It went online and ran online through 2013 as an online magazine, and it died with issue 221. That was during 4th edition. I don't have any of those. I didn't engage in 4th edition. It was just, I had enough information by then. 4th edition went away from a lot of the elements I liked in the game. It had no Greyhawk. My big excitement about 3rd edition was that it was set by default in Greyhawk. So there's just a tremendous amount of Greyhawk information to be pulled from 3rd edition sources. So Dungeon or Dungeon Adventures, we always call it Dungeon Magazine. It was really good. It was worth buying. It was another monthly thing to look forward to. I always at least thumbed through it, even if I wasn't really planning on spending the money on it. It was still something to always look at. And as I said, as the various hobby stores closed them out, I was able to snatch up a bunch of issues for $1 a piece. And why not? So, again, not as favored by me as Dragon Magazine. I felt Dragon Magazine was a lot more useful to me as a DM, as a player. But Dungeon Magazine certainly had its place, and there were some times when I was stuck for an idea. I just pulled out a stack of Dungeons, started thumbing through them, and hey, what do you know? Problem solved. I've got a game. So that's all I really wanted to say about Dungeon Magazine for right now. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe. And I'll see you next time on page 121.